If the wars of this century were fought over oil, the wars of the next century will be fought over water. A smart man said this in 1995, and he was right. Ayubowan, everybody. Welcome to World Rivers Day 2023. I would like to thank the Irrigation Department for inviting us to come and say a few words and talk a little bit about water resource management and rivers in Sri Lanka and how climate change will impact Sri Lanka as well as the water resources and the challenges that we will face ahead. So, we're from AMPARC Foundation. AMPARC Foundation is a non-profit organization with the express purpose of developing solutions and mitigations for climate change impacts across Sri Lanka. So, first of all, I would like to, we all know that there's a thing called climate change. And different people have different understandings of it. So just to get a quick overview, let's have a look at what climate change is. So, what is climate change? So climate change is the cumulative impacts of human actions aggregating into climate impacts. So a lot of different things that we do as human beings, as society, coming together. So we know pollution of the sky through vehicles, through factories, all of these kind of human activities that contribute towards greenhouse gas emissions. Even things like cows burping contribute to greenhouse gases and climate change. Now this seems funny, but when you consider that one cow produces 100 kilograms of methane per year, when you consider that there are 1 billion cows in the world, when you consider that methane is 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2, then you realize our habit of eating beef is contributing towards 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Even things like us taking water from the well, from a tube well. It has been proven now that 10% of global sea level rise is attributed to human beings pumping water out of the ground over the last 100 to 150 years, and that water eventually flowing into the sea. So, while all these things are going on, we as a race are polluting our oceans. The problem is, of the planet's ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, 50.5% of that happens through marine algae. The sea absorbs 50.5% of these things, and the ecosystems in the sea are in grave danger. At the same time, we know global deforestation is happening at an alarming rate. So whilst we are putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, we are restricting the ability of our planet to absorb these gases. So why is this a big deal? What's the problem? This is how climate change warms the world. Heat enters the earth every single day from the sun. Part of this heat radiation bounces off our upper atmosphere and bounces back out into space. Part of it comes through our atmosphere, hits the surface of our planet and bounces out into space. But the majority of it heats up the planet. And as we know, anything that is hot radiates heat. But the heat that goes back out is of a smaller wavelength. And that heat gets trapped within the greenhouse gases of our atmosphere, and only a little bit of it goes back out. This is where carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases become a significant problem. So, let's look at carbon dioxide. The level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased by 50% over the last 70 years. Here you can see a graph of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases over the last 200 years. And you can see what has happened in the last 70. People say it's normal, global warming, it happens before, it'll go up, it'll come down. I would like to point out this graph, which maps CO2 content in our atmosphere for the last 800,000 years. These are taken from ice cores in the Antarctic. You can see that every 100,000 years or so, the level of CO2 goes up, temperatures go up, they come back down. Now you can see what we have done in the last 50 years. 800,000 versus 50. So you can see there is a significant impact that has started destabilizing our this thing. So what's the big deal? If there's a little bit more carbon dioxide, what's the problem? The Earth is an enclosed system. We are basically, what happens to the atmosphere impacts the sea. What happens to the sea impacts currents, impacts nutrition. Everything is linked. We call it a 1,000-year system because when a major disruption happens to our atmosphere, it's like you take a rock and you throw it into a bucket of water. The waves go out, the waves come back in, the waves go out. It takes our planet about 1,000 years to come back to equilibrium, to come back to balance. So us spiking CO2 to this level in such a short period of 50 years is having major impacts on the planet. And we are just starting to see the start of these impacts. These impacts will get more and reinforced as we go forward. The United Nations estimates that 1 in 3 people living today is exposed to deadly heat. In the next 50 years, every 3 or 4 of your grandchildren will be exposed to deadly heat. The UN estimates that 1 in 3 people are highly vulnerable to climate change, and that includes Sri Lanka, because we are considered one of those countries which is highly vulnerable to certain aspects of climate change. The question is, how will climate change affect Sri Lanka? How does it affect us? What are we going to face? What do we have to prepare for? Sri Lanka is a small island in the middle of 2 big oceans on both sides. We have a mountainous region and we have a flat region. So it is very difficult to quantify Sri Lanka as one environment. We have the wet zone, we have the intermediate zone, and we have the dry zone. So mapping climate change impacts on Sri Lanka is very difficult. Now, what are some of the impacts that we can estimate? One is increase in rainfall intensity, which causes flooding. We have all seen this. We have seen our streams turn into hose pipes, water shooting out, flash floods coming in, massive amounts of rainfall falling in. The once in a 100-year flood has now become a once in a 25-year flood. The frequency and the intensity of rainfall in Sri Lanka is going to increase massively. The climate risk profile for the mountain region undertaken by the ADB and the World Bank Group, this indicates the projection for rainfall and precipitation in the mountain region in the next 50 years. As you can see, the Kegol and Kurunegala districts will experience about 60 millimeters less rainfall in the first intermonsoonal period, which will be followed by up to 200 millimeters more rainfall in the same areas at the southwest monsoon. This will lead to significant issues. This will lead to significant flooding in the Gampaha, Kurunegala, Colombo, Kalutara, Galle, Hambantota, and Ratnapura districts. Now, when we think of flooding, we have a certain idea what flooding looks like. We have had flooding every single year in some place or the other. But let me draw your attention to the fact that flooding in a climate change world is slightly different. Let me point out to you what happened 12 days ago. 12 days ago. This is a picture, a satellite image of the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea has the highest recorded temperatures in its history at the moment, which means when this cyclone that went across the Mediterranean Sea picked up so much water on it and it hit the North Libyan coast. When it hit the mountain range of the North Libyan coastline, the rainfall that happened there, half the annual rainfall for that region fell in one day. Half the year's rainfall fell in one day. What happened? The water rushed in, and there was a small dam. The dam got overwhelmed, the dam collapsed. Water started rushing down the river valley to hit the second dam that was there. That dam immediately collapsed as well, and the water rushed in as an inland tsunami that came in. This is what was experienced thereafter. This is the city of Derna. This is what it looked like after the flood hit. These images are very familiar to us Sri Lankans. This is what we saw during a tsunami. The question is not going to be, can this happen to Sri Lanka? The question is, when will this happen to Sri Lanka, and how often will it happen to Sri Lanka? So our idea of flooding, we have to start adjusting a little bit, because the world is changing. Now, what are some of the other impacts that we'll be facing? We'll be facing multi-year droughts. If we can't cultivate Yala Maha, if we miss 4 cultivation seasons, what will happen to our food supply in Sri Lanka? If this happens in Sri Lanka, these conditions will also happen in other food-producing countries in the world. Now, this drought situation, how does it impact us? We use traditional agriculture practices in Sri Lanka. අපි පැල හිටවනවා දෙයියනේ වරුසාව දෙන්න කියලා බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. But climate change කියන්නේ මේ patterns වෙනස් වෙන එක. අපිට predict කරන්න බෑ ඉදිරියට. Right? අපි හිටවන කාලේ අස්වැන්න ගන්න කාලේ අරම ඒවා අපි වෙනස් කරන්න මේ වෙනස් වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට ඒකට adapt කරන්න සිදු වෙනවා. Increased landslide risk. We all know landslides are becoming more prevalent around the country. This is the map of landslides in 2007 in Sri Lanka. And this is the projection of landslides over the next 50 years. Notice that most of the map is red. Its landslides have not only human costs, they have costs on infrastructure, they have costs on river basin coverage, which has direct implications on water resource. We're looking at best case projections over the next 50 years in terms of heat is that the temperature will raise by 2.3 to 5.4 degrees Celsius over the next 50 years. ඔගොල්ලෝ පොඩ්ඩක් හිතලා බැලුවොත් මතක කාලේ hottest day එක ෂයිදානම් මාර රස්නේ කියලා හිතනවනේ. ඕගොල්ලොන්ගේ මුණුපුරවරම පිටරට ඒක සාමාන්‍යයෙන් දවසක් වෙනවා. That is going to be normal for them. Imagine what their hottest days are look like. Heat is a significant problem because the human body cannot function efficiently beyond 35 degrees centigrade. We slow down. We have heat illness, heat deaths, loss of productivity. Our medical system gets overwhelmed. Our GDP goes down because it is too hot for people to work. These are significant problems apart from disease and other incidental problems that come through. Another big problem is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, which is in every plant around us, the efficiency of chlorophyll drops beyond 34.5 degrees, which means the hotter it gets, the less plants will grow, less food gets produced, less carbon dioxide gets converted to oxygen, and these are all problems for us. And this is on land as well as in the sea. Now, another impact is sea level rise. Now, we've all seen coastal erosion. These are all familiar pictures to us when we go around. Based on the coastal bathymetry, the shape of the seabed around Sri Lanka, based on our soil type, based on the fact that Sri Lanka has one of the lowest gravities in the world. We are in a region which has the lowest gravity in the world. Based on the Coriolis effect, which is the turning of the planet and how it affects water, Sri Lanka will have significant impacts on sea level rise and coastal erosion. Based on our estimates, we can say that for every centimeter of sea level rise, Sri Lanka will lose about 10 meters of land. For every centimeter, we stand to lose about 10 meters of our coastline. These are the projections for sea level rise by NOAA, the North Atlantic Atmospheric Association. Basically, best case, those 4 colors, the blue color is if all of the world decides climate change is a big problem and we all start addressing it now. The red color projection is if we don't do anything and we continue as we are continuing today. We're looking at a minimum of 20 centimeters of sea level rise to maybe up to 2 meters. Based on the climate risk profile for Sri Lanka, done by the ADB, we stand potentially for 2.47 meters of sea level rise, which means we lose between 200 meters and 2.5 kilometers of coastline around Sri Lanka. So, let me show you a map of Sri Lanka. The green area will be the map of Sri Lanka in 50 years' time. The red area will most likely be under the sea. Now, notice where most of our cities are located. Notice where most of our roads and infrastructure is located. Notice where our tourism industries are located. Notice where our cities and our commercial centers are located. This is a significant threat that we will face. There's no going around it. The only thing we can do here is plan for it and start taking action. We can say we can put barriers on the sea and try to reduce the sea level or try to prevent erosion. We don't have the resources to put barriers all around Sri Lanka. And even if we do, the result is going to be, this is the land use map of Sri Lanka, the latest land use map done by the Survey Department. The light green areas that you see on this map, that is our paddy cultivation, our main paddy growing areas. Notice what happens where the paddy areas are and where erosion is. The Ampara district, rice bowl of Sri Lanka. Where are the paddy areas and where is erosion? We are going to have significant challenges in food production moving forward due to this loss of land. And the problem is sea level rise, we know there's aquifers below our feet, we know there's groundwater. As we pump more and more groundwater out, more and more seawater seeps in underneath. As the sea level rises, stolic pressure basically pushes more salt water into our groundwater table, which means our groundwater resources get more salinated, become less, and results ultimately in salination of arable lands, a problem we are already well aware of and trying to fight in the north and east of Sri Lanka. This will only get worse, which means we have less land to produce more food with less water to do it with. Scientists say that we are currently in the middle or in the 6th great extinction event of our planet. Can anybody name what the last great extinction was? Anybody have an idea of what the last great extinction is? Exactly. When the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. A 6.5 kilometer size meteoroid came and slammed into the Bay of Mexico and created a huge problem. What people don't realize is that dinosaurs died out because of climate change. This meteoroid created such an impact on the global climate that it wiped out 98% of all living species on the planet. Every single main extinction event that has happened in the planet is due to climate change. Rapid changes in climate where species cannot evolve fast enough to adapt. So, at the moment, species are going extinct at a rate that we haven't seen before. Bees are going extinct all over the world. They're dying out. It's a major concern. Why is it such a concern? 1/3 of all food that human beings cultivate is dependent on pollination by bees. When the bees go, we say bye-bye to these foodstuffs. In the oceans, the situation is arguably even worse. This is the oceanic food chain. Right at the bottom, you have phytoplankton, algae. They're eaten by zooplankton, tiny baby fish, baby crabs, baby corals, everything that is microscopic in the sea. Most of them have carapaces, external skeletons made out of calcium. The ocean today is 30% more acidic than it was at the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1850. 30% more acidic. The more acidic the sea gets, the less ability the base of this food chain has to adapt and survive. The zooplankton is what the hal massa eats. The hal massa gets eaten by the salea, and the parava, and the tora, and the mora, and ultimately by the apex predator, all of you. What happens when the base of that food chain goes away? Unfortunately, this is already happening. There are entire patches of the ocean which are now declared dead zones. Nothing lives there. There is no oxygen in the water. The food chain has collapsed. The decomposition of the algae has absorbed all the oxygen in this. Any fish that swims into this area suffocates and dies. These dead zones are all over the world now, and more are being created. So, problem is, 1 billion people in the world depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. That includes us Sri Lankans. So, we can go on about a lot of implications. I'll just touch on one more thing that we need to be cognizant of, we need to be aware of, which is Sri Lanka facing climate change in the context of the international context. We're not alone in this world. This is a flood projection map for Bangladesh. 1 meter sea level rise, 15 million people get displaced. 1.5 meter sea level rise, 18 million people get displaced. At 2 meters sea level rise, most of the Ganges river basin goes under. Most of the most densely populated this is a country with 140 million people. Now think, if your country is finding it difficult to feed your people, will you be willing to accept millions of refugees from other countries? In the last few years, how many times has India restricted the export of rice? Other countries exported the restrictor of food. So in 40, 50 years, we cannot have the luxury of assuming that the world is going to be there to help us. We need to start thinking solutions for ourselves. We need to start implementing self-sustainability and solutions for these climatic challenges that we're going to be facing. Yes, the international community will help, but there will be hundreds of countries that need help, not just us. So we need to be aware of it. Okay, there are many other impacts we can talk about, from storm surges to cyclones to all of these things, but I think I've depressed all of you quite enough for the moment. This is a lot of information to absorb, and it is a very serious issue.